All right. So today I'm very excited to share a wonderful conversation that I had with Tracy Prowse. So I've spoken about Tracy a little bit on the channel before because Tracy played a very important role in my healing journey and coming out of long COVID and going deeper into the path wherever it led. And Tracy was like a coach for me. We worked together for a while, and the following is a great conversation we had discussing various aspects of the recovery journey, mind-body healing. I was very excited to share this conversation and to have this conversation with Tracy because Tracy has a lot of experience in the medical space. She's a trained physiotherapist. She has an honors degree in physiotherapy, a master's degree in sports physiotherapy. She also has a postgraduate certification in pain management and another postgraduate certification in mindfulness-based interventions. And she's currently training in the 3-year somatic experiencing practitioner training program. So Tracy has a lot of qualifications and a lot of experience and knowledge in the holistic mind-body healing space, but a lot of it is research-based. So I'm quite excited to share a little bit of her perspective on things because I'm generally just speaking from direct experience of my journey and the things I learned along the way, but I'm often I don't get too caught up in specifics of research and all of that. So it's nice to have the perspective from somebody who's in a little bit more of a formal space with all of this. I think it can appeal to different people. So yeah, the following conversation we had, we touched on mind-body healing, a little bit of Tracy's background, and the various aspects such as self-compassion and authenticity and how the physical healing journey has a lot to do with the spiritual growth journey as well, and how those two are not really separable. So yeah, here's the conversation, and I hope you find it helpful and enjoyable. So yeah, Tracy, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit about what the work is you do, what your background is, just to let people know who you are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so obviously you and I found each other more in the medical space, didn't we? I think you were referred by one of the doctors that you'd seen on your long journey. So I'm actually a physiotherapist in training, not in training. I trained as a physiotherapist many years ago. That was 30 years ago, actually. And since then, I've been on a very long journey of trying to understand the body and the mind. I always was interested in the mind-body connection, but back then, 30 years ago, it was very out there, and I had to kind of almost keep it quite quiet and to myself. And I almost thought that the mind-body-spirit connection was something that I had in my personal life. And then in my professional life, there was, okay, so I'm a body worker. I work with the body and I work with pain and I work with fatigue and I work with illness. And luckily for me, neuroscience has started weaving its way into the mind-body-spirit space, actually. And definitely for the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years, I've been exploring. I came at this via neuroscience. So the pain science field actually is really where my deep dive started. I did a master's in sports physio, which was also fantastic. Sports Science Institute in Cape Town was doing amazing work with what they called the central governor. Back then, that was 2001, 2002. Tim Noakes was leading up a lot of that work, and understanding that there was this, yes, your muscles might fatigue when you're an athlete, but what's kicking in before then? And their research into the central governor was kind of also what opened my mind towards something that's governing all these different systems in our bodies. And then I started with,
what is the central governor?
So the central governor is really, they wouldn't have said it was the brain, but I suppose in essence it is the brain, but it's more to do with the central part of us that governs all these different processes, the musculoskeletal system, the respiratory system. So they were looking at is it VO2 max? Does that determine, what makes someone top of their game in terms of being an athlete? Or is it the oxidative stress on the
Mm.
muscles, or is it cardiac output? And they did all these different papers, and then they eventually came to this conclusion, and I can't exactly remember all of it, but they came up with the central governor idea. So if you Google central governor and Tim Noakes, some of those papers will come up. But that was a long time ago, and back then that was considered to be quite new and it was groundbreaking. And I think also being there at Sports Science also really developed the geek in me, which is really wanting to know. I think that's how you and I bonded.
Yeah, lots of neuroscience geeking.
Like, okay, I want to understand this, and I want to know that what I'm putting out there isn't just absolute rubbish, because sometimes there's like the latest flavor of the month, and that's what we tend to focus on in physio or health or whatever. And then from there, my journey where it really kind of moved towards persistent pain, starting in athletes, like trying to understand why someone might have this knee pain that just never goes away, or it keeps coming back over and over again. And it didn't fit in with the biomedical model. And I was actually living in England at the time, and I started going on these courses by various pain neuroscience physios, actually. So maybe you've come across them: Lorimer Moseley, David Butler, another guy called Peter O'Sullivan. He came up with, the first time I heard the word biopsychosocial was Peter O'Sullivan. And that was also, again, back then, I mean, I'm talking, early 2000s, biopsychosocial, like, what are you talking about? What do you mean psychosocial? And then starting to understand that there was more to someone's injury or even their pain than what we thought of, which was that pain was an indicator of what was coming from the tissues in the body, and then understanding that there was more to pain than that measurement. And in fact, now we know that it's actually a very poor indicator of what's going on in the tissues. And then I guess, and then from there, as I developed more in the pain science world, and I did my pain practitioner training, I then still realized that there was something missing in terms of how I was being able to take this information and help people. And then I did the mindfulness training, and that was through the Institute for Mindfulness in South Africa. And that really was quite life-changing for me in terms of my active being and how I work with people.
Had you like engaged with meditation or mindfulness or spirituality at all before you did the mindfulness?
I had explored more of sort of a mantra meditation, transcendental, TM. I always found like I was so, like, in my mind, just very judgmental and going, oh, well, I'm so useless at this. So, I mean, I definitely had more of an ADHD brain. And so for me, trying to sit and say a mantra over and over again, or, try and empty my mind, it was just impossible. So I just gave up, to be honest. I would try and I'd do it for about 6 months, and then I'd give up again, and then I'd start up again. And it was just, and then when I discovered mindfulness meditation, I understood, okay, then this idea of cultivating awareness became something that made so much more sense to me, firstly, just logically, and then secondly, experientially. It's like, this is available to anyone. You don't have to be some guru to be able to, and it's nothing to do with emptying the mind. It's just about.
I think that's such a common like stumbling block for people when they enter this space. If you haven't had like a good guide or mentor to kind of point you past that initial resistance, or like how your mind is going to doubt yourself, that like, I'm doing this wrong, because you're coming into it with an expectation of like, this is what this practice needs to be, which with mindfulness and similar practices, which is such a great starting point, is you're just noticing what's coming up, right? It's just like and it's okay. It's not like you're trying to force your mind into a calm state. So I remember for myself, like when I started meditating, that was that was very clear for me as well, that feeling of, oh, surely I can't meditate. The mind is so quick to doubt itself there. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I think that really allowed me to then bring or weave in the mindfulness-based chronic pain management into my practice, or mindfulness-based symptom management, and treatment, actually, because once we can start understanding how the mind works and how the mind is in relation to the physical symptom, then we can start unpicking it and really seeing it for what it truly is. And that was probably, I don't know how I was working beforehand.
Yeah.
What was I doing with people? So that was quite for me and liberating for me, and also liberating myself from this need to fix, noticing my own patterns coming up of being that, and it goes back to my own childhood and my own upbringing, which understanding that my need to fix someone else was causing my nervous system to react when someone would come back a week later and say, listen, I'm worse, or I'm feeling I'm more fatigued than I've ever been, and then noticing the panic building up inside of me, and sort of letting go of that need to fix and be, and almost going, okay, well, that's where we're at. It's so much more liberating for me to work in this way. It feels much freer.
I can totally relate to that. I mean, in my brief experience of working with people over the past year, when there's still kind of stuff to work through in yourself, it will be pulled out, when somebody else is also, when they're in a really challenging state, and that might bring out the fear in you, and then we kind of put that onto, okay, I need to fix you. It's one of the most helpful mentors for me has been Angelo DeLulo. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, and it was kind of what we were discussing before we started this call, was meeting somebody where you're at, and then also the fact that in some of his Q&As and stuff, he would always when speaking with somebody in the space of working with somebody else, so somebody that's on this kind of journey of self-realization and healing whatever's in the psyche and all of that, the more that one wakes up within themselves and does that, the more available you are for whoever else is there. And it just, I don't know, personally, it just becomes clearer and clearer that, when I used to struggle with somebody in a really difficult state, that was more about me than it was about them. And now somebody can be in whatever state, and you can almost just be a space, like you said, meeting somebody where they're at. You can just be a space for okay, let's hold that fear, let's hold that kind of feeling. And that's often what somebody needs in that space. It's often when we try to fix them, that's part of the problem, is this deep rooted emotion is coming up, and all it needs is a space to be held. So
well, I think it also goes, I work a lot with children that have got persistent pain or chronic illnesses and chronic fatigue, long COVID, all those things that you're familiar with. And I see this so much with the parent-child relationship, and just seeing how much the parents can make or break the child's healing journey in terms of, often done with the greatest of intentions and kind of really what I always call it the mama bear, or papa bear, because what you're wanting to do as a parent, I can relate that when your child's not well or they're struggling with something or in pain, physical pain, emotional pain, as the parent, you want to go and fix that for them. You really, that's, it's such a drive. But what really offers the child more, not just benefit, but comfort, is feeling in themselves that, okay, so mom and dad or mom or dad or my carer is okay. So if they're okay with my symptoms, then I'm going to be okay. And it also starts handing over a sense of agency to that child. And it's the same with the therapist client, therapist patient relationship, because if the client or the patient feels that the therapist is, their nervous system's ramping up, they'll attune to that. And so, gosh, if my doctor's scared, then I definitely need to be scared. And this is, again, the doctor has that belief that they need to do it for me. Then well, obviously I can't do it on my own. So, agency, empowerment, providing a space for someone to heal is really what I would be focusing on in my therapeutic relationship with someone. Because I feel that that's so much more of a gift than anything else that I could offer.
Yeah, exactly. It brings to mind something that was important when we started first working together, and the mention of agency is what brought this to mind for me. Because if we think about the medical space, and specifically people with these like chronic illnesses, often they have a lot of experience with going to doctors with the expectation, and it's a natural expectation, right? If you think of how we brought up that when there's something wrong with me, I go to a doctor and they tell me how to fix it. There isn't a feeling of agency about our own health. In its essence, that's what it was for me with this journey. But you go through that. I feel like you have to go through that and the challenges that come with it. And if I look at the people that are really stuck with, say, CFS or long COVID, a lot of it is, I think, because they were kind of hurt by the medical system, or like, and then that leads to the clinging to the identity of their illness as well. Is like the doctor said there's nothing wrong with me, so then there's a need to kind of defend that there is something wrong, and that's kind of keeps someone stuck. But what I wanted to touch on here was when we first started working together, you made it quite clear to me that in our work together, it was important that I understood that I was responsible for my own healing in a way, that can sound scary to someone. And I get a bit of pushback online talking about this, that, people say it's like gaslighting or victim shaming or something like that. But there is a really important truth there, that you have to kind of take on some responsibility, that with the help of somebody else early on, but that you can't just expect somebody else to fix you, so I don't know. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right in terms of the early on part of the journey and then the later on. And I always think of it as a bit of more of in a coaching space. I know you do coaching. And I sometimes even don't like calling myself a physiotherapist, even though I am a registered physiotherapist and I work with medical aids and all of that. Because I see myself more as a coach. So in the beginning, when if you want to start, I don't know, I want to do the Comrades Marathon in a year's time, I'm going to get the help of a coach, and the coach is there to show me and help me how to do the, put the training in the right way. But you can get to a point where you don't need the coach anymore. At the end of the day, you got to get your tackies on and go for the run. The coach cannot run for you.
They're not going to run your race.
They're not going to run your race, and they're most certainly not going to run your training your training runs for you. So I think that that's the role, is that it's not that I'm going to disappear and leave you and say, sorry for you, you're on your own here, kiddo. Not like that at all. It would be more just a sort of a finding, okay, where you're at, where's your current fitness level. I'm just using the analogy again. And then find out, okay, so how can I be of best support? And sometimes it might be in the beginning quite a structured sort of ring fencing of the situation, because so often people have been on this, and I would call it medical trauma, because it's just, as you say, there's been gaslighting, there's been told that, this test after that test, this shows mitochondrial, we were talking about the mitochondria the other earlier. This one shows clotting problem. Another thing shows that my inflammatory markers are up. So, and so, yes, some of the tests are showing things and other tests aren't, but then the doctors don't really know what that means in relation to my symptoms. And then some doctors will just say, actually, you know what, you need to go and see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And then that's where you're left. And so that journey is very, very traumatizing to the nervous system. And so often, by the time they come to me, their autonomic nervous systems in a complete state of insecurity and fear, mostly, which obviously is driving the system into an overprotective state further, which is obviously going to exacerbate the symptoms. So how I see that the role of the therapist, and it's about finding a therapist that I think that you would resonate with, maybe that your listeners would resonate with. That can be that person that when you're where you know that now that you are with this person and you're on this journey together, that there's a sense of safety in relation to that, being with that person. So for some people, they might need a schedule, and I think we did this and it didn't work for you at all. But I think that for some people, but for some people, that's where they just need to start. They just need to be told by someone, it's okay. You do not need to do all of this. In fact, don't do it all, because at the moment you're doing this kind of boom bust. On my good days, I'm going to do everything I can do. And then I'm just going to, for 3 or 4 days, just kind of go to bed. And so that could be a sort of a feeling of ring fencing, where you're going, let's just get the more rest in place, a little bit more of a measured approach. Sometimes we speak about the spoons, the idea, metaphor. Sometimes we talk about just ratios, whatever. But that might be where we start. But then with someone else, they might come to me and they go, this is my schedule. Boom, 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 boom. I'm doing meditation in the morning. I'm drinking these supplements. I'm drinking my amazing superfood smoothie. Then I'm going to my Reiki person. Then I'm going and I look at the schedule and I'm just exhausted. Not that there's not enough rest, but just that it's exhaustingly black or white. And so then the black or white schedule is actually what's ramping up their system, because when they don't do it, when they don't stick to their schedule, it's freaking them out. Or maybe they did a bit too much, or they went 10 minutes over what they were planning to do. And so, really understanding what's going to get a little bit of regulation, or just a sense of safety for this person, or safeness within themselves. And that's where a lot of the trauma work comes in, because it's often I do subscribe to the polyvagal theory, but, it doesn't have to be. It's really just this understanding that because of how our nervous systems have developed earlier on in our lives, we might have a tendency to react to something stressful, either with a kind of got to push through, go for a type of response, sympathetic nervous system mode, or if it's maybe that's either too much for me, or maybe it's not what I'm able to do. There could even be more of like a collapse response and just a freeze. So trying to understand, where are they? What's going to help this person right now get into more of a ventral vagal response, which is more just like a regulated parasympathetic nervous system mode. And also understanding that you're not going to stay there forever. You're going to move in and out, and the nervous system is okay with that. But obviously right now that the tolerance is so small. So trying to work out, okay, let's just first get us into a relative sense of safeness, and then start looking at where do we kind of just expand the boundaries. And that's where the somatic experiencing comes in a very helpful way, because it's trying to help someone feel in their body, what does that actually feel like? What does it feel like as I start moving my sense of safeness or resource into a little bit of a sense of unsafeness, knowing that my nervous system has the capacity to come back again. Like we're programmed in that way. So it just depends on where people are at and where we start. And I've spoken about self-compassion with you. That for me, is also sometimes I'll start with self-compassion and then move into other directions. So it just depends on where we're at.
Amazing. Let's come back to self-compassion. One thing I wanted to touch on, which I think is very clear in the people that I've engaged with, specifically people that have been stuck for a long time, maybe it's that fluctuation between, like you said, the too much like go fight or flight mode, but then also kind of the freeze mode. And it's like you said, it's that response to stress. Because what I found in myself was I went from one to the other because of the fear that kind of came up around specifically a lot of the information online about chronic fatigue syndrome, ME. When you come across some of the information online that, wow, people don't recover from this, that then I remember my response to stress in the past used to be just go, and then, okay, I've got this illness. And now it was complete like freeze mode whenever stress came up. It was like, oh shit, like I can't do too much. Any form of stress is bad, and it's like
Dangerous.
it's
Mm,
dangerous.
mm,
Exactly. And it's
mm,
like, yeah, it's not either one of those approaches. It's not like stress is completely bad, but it's also for some people, maybe as you said, they're just too go, go, go. They need to kind of come back into the middle. And I think there is where self-compassion is such a helpful tool, because if I remember, um like when we first started working together, or some point in our path together, I think this was the first time that I really introduced self-compassion. And it was when I remember I was getting so stressed out about diet. So for me, as we both said, like the activity scheduling didn't really work. And that was partially because I was too locked up in this dysregulated autonomic system where
mm.
I actually needed to do a lot of emotion work before I could, make the right decisions. And you're pointing that out to me one day where I think we were talking about, I was telling you, I don't know if it's this diet, I don't know if it's keto, I don't know if it's low histamine, I don't know if it's this, I don't know if it's that. And you were like, it sounds like you just need a hug. Really, like you're trying so hard. And I think this is the case for so many people. They're trying so hard to do the right thing. But part of that trying so hard is to get away from the trauma. It's like that's the response, because there's so much locked up in the nervous system. And I think self-compassion is really the gateway to work through that, because you don't want to force it, but you do need to address it in some way. And for me, self-compassion
Yeah.
was essential as it went.
I think it is. And, what's interesting is that more recently Kristen Neff has done a lot of research into self-compassion and cultivating self-compassion. And then, what that does on our physiology. So
Yeah.
if anyone's interested in the research behind self-compassion, she's probably the first place to start. But even more than that, I was reading a paper, I think it was a 2023 paper on just chronic lower back pain. Simple chronic lower back pain, and looking at real-time MRI scans of the brain and looking at an 8-week self-compassion, sort of like a mindfulness-based stress reduction, but it was more to do with mindfulness-based self-compassion.
Yeah.
And 8-week program. And so they did 2 groups of people, one that just did a kind of more of a pain neuroscience, a bit of movement. And I think there was like a little quiet relaxation practice. That was it with the
Yes.
one group. And then the other group was the self-compassion group. And it was really interesting seeing the results of what was happening on real-time MRI in terms of those kind of like pain-making areas of the brain lighting up pre and post. And that's just self-compassion, nothing else. No movement, no kind of pain neuroscience,
Yeah.
nothing. It was just
Yeah.
self-compassion. And that's just one example of people with persistent pain. But that I know that research is developing more and more and more, especially with people that I would classify as perseverers, which are people that tend to push through no matter what. So in other words, they will maybe even there's a sense of fatigue building up in their body, or maybe a sense of pain or something that's physically uncomfortable, but they've learned to not even really notice it, but just lock it away, push it away, push it away, push it away until they can't push it away anymore.
Yeah.
And so understanding where that has come from is the key to unlocking the self-compassion, because you can't just say to someone, well, that's not a very compassionate thing to do, is to just, would you do that? The classic one is, would you do that to someone that you love? Would you tell them to just push through their pain,
Yeah.
And they're like, no, obviously, I wouldn't. But
Yeah.
that doesn't change it for them. They still cannot find a place within them that can kind of like feel into a compassion for myself if I'm doing that.
Yeah.
So for me, the way in that I found very helpful is to understand where it's come from.
Yeah.
Where did this need the survival strategy? Because it actually is a survival strategy. Like that served you at some point in your life. It's just no longer serving you now. And so not, you don't have to go and rehash the past and talk about what happened when, but understanding that that strategy or that pattern as a pattern. It's not who you are. It is not your personality. And and that's where the awareness, cultivating awareness and mindfulness and consciousness really starts coming into the story, because understanding that that is not you. That is almost like a traumatized part of you that developed in order to keep you safe. Perhaps there was chaos going on in your household when you were growing up, and there was a lot of discomfort inside of you as a little 8-year-old, and you had to keep going, because if you didn't, what would the consequence have been then?
Yeah.
So understanding the compassion is towards the 8-year-old, not towards the 33-year-old.
Yeah.
Then it's a little bit easier. So there's a few little strategies, sensory motor strategies that I use with that. But even if it's not a kind of like a formal practice or exercise, just understanding that this part of me needs compassion. And maybe sometimes I'll even ask people to bring in a little photograph of themselves when they were young, or visualize, maybe they know an 8-year-old and try and see how, if they can offer that image of that person the compassion when they just work. This little 8-year-old's just working so hard, and they feel, maybe they're sore, maybe they're in pain, maybe they're tired, but they're just pushing through. It's a lot easier to elicit a sense of compassion for that little 8-year-old than it is to put it just to your 33-year-old self. So for me, orientating the nervous system to being 33, I'm just using that as a completely arbitrary age. I don't know where that came from.
You're 33, aren't you, Tracy?
Yes. Thank you. But so orientation for me is a really important strategy in terms of self-compassion. So orientating to being 33, to being wise, and even knowing, well, what can I do at the age of 33 that is actually very helpful from a survival strategy? So it might be that you can drive, or it might be that you can say no. You can maybe walk out of a room if someone's shouting at you, so it kind of goes into that side of things. So orientating to being 33, and even orientating your body to being 33. So if there's a physical symptom in the back, or maybe it's just fatigue in the whole body, sensing into that body and going, this 33-year-old self, and then bringing your attention to the 8-year-old and seeing how one can offer compassion for the 8-year-old can be very helpful when you're noticing this tendency to want to kind of do everything that you can today, because you've got like today to do the shopping and the cleaning and the I've got to do these emails and so on. So we can use these quite sort of psychological techniques in the moment of someone's day-to-day living, and that's how we start getting repair work happening, or that's how the healing process can start really kicking in. And sometimes I will, maybe not do it so cognitively. It depends where someone's at. If they're able to sense into themselves, I will usually kind of find a place of self-compassion through what I'm currently doing the somatic experiencing training, which is a trauma-based therapy. Usually use kind of an SE approach to allow the nervous system to find a place within them that feels resourceful, but also sort of a felt sense of being safe and looked after, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that, and it brings to mind, just going back to something you said a little bit earlier, it brings to mind a very important phase of my own recovery journey, and it ties into all of the self-compassion. But it was like you said, is understanding that traumatized child, or whether it's that fear response, freeze response, whichever response it is, it was there to protect you, and that was so helpful for me. So after our work together, I went and did a brain retraining neuroplasticity kind of course specifically designed for people stuck in these states. It was called DNRS. I think I might have mentioned it to you at some point. And That was, if I look back, that was a really important time for me learning to cultivate self-compassion, because what I would do, it's quite similar to what you were saying about like the 8-year-old self and the 33-year-old self. They would talk about kind of the fear mind, or the amygdala, to put it in a neuroscientist perspective, and then kind of your more forebrain or your wise self. And that, like, for me at the time, that was what I needed to kind of make self-compassion concrete. It was like, okay, step in, like when you notice the fatigue is getting too much, and I'm just like, oh, I want to go lie on the couch, I'm too scared to go for a walk or something. Then instead of giving into that pathway, which is where I was stuck, it was like that pathway was just too easy a jump each time. It was like, you got to step into a little bit of discomfort, but then I would run through these steps, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying, that agency of okay, there's something I can do in this moment. And it was kind of like, but like you mentioned, like a little bit of a cognitive starting point, because yeah, often self-compassion can maybe seem quite abstract to somebody or something like that. It was like, step into the shoes of your wise self. And it was actually very cleverly designed, the course. It was like, you put these little pieces of paper on the floor, and you'd step from the I can't remember, the traumatized self or whatever, and step into the wise self and say, like, look, I understand, that you're scared and that you're just doing your job. Like, for me, that was what really resonated, is I was fighting with this part of myself for so long. And it was like, no, the amygdala, whatever it is, the fear response, this whole thing driving this illness, it's just doing its job, and it's maybe gotten a little bit out of control. And then the reminder was like, hey, it's okay. I don't need to get rid of you, but just take a break, just like say to that part of your brain, just like, relax, it's okay. Not forcing into relaxation, but just like, thank you for what you're trying to do. Like, that was always
Yeah.
helpful for me. It was like, thank you. I acknowledging it, like we said, like meeting a patient where it's at, meeting your fear where it's at. Like, thank you, fear. Thank you. It needs almost to be acknowledged, like this part of ourselves from childhood. It's like, okay, thank you. You were trying to do your job. But now, as you mentioned,
I'm in charge.
yeah, now I'm
Yeah, now
33,
I've got
and
this.
and
Yeah.
I can do what I need to in those situations. And I like what you said about being able to set boundaries that child probably couldn't do. Like, that's where that was the only response at that time. Like an adult probably shouting at the child, and you don't have the ability to say no, step back.
Yeah, well,
So
the
yeah,
consequences of that might have been to that 8-year-old that they might have gotten beaten, or,
yeah,
or kicked out of the house, or something that truly threatened their survival. So,
yeah,
so just being the good child, or,
mm,
pushing through, would have kept that child safe. And so, it's really, as you say, thank you, like, gosh,
yeah,
because if you feel into the thank you, it really opens one's heart. And
yeah,
that's where self-compassion, the well of self-compassion, comes from, the open heart,
yeah,
as opposed to, the anger and the frustration that invariably comes up when you notice symptoms.
yeah,
And then it's like, I actually was reading a paper yesterday, something that popped up in my um, subscription. It was something about new weapon to combat pain. And I just thought, flip, those are, the words
yeah,
combat and weapon, and pain is there to protect us. Like,
yeah,
wow, can we, this is yesterday, a 2024 paper. You're like,
yeah, yeah,
because if you understand that the fatigue and the pain and the anxiety and the fear are all actually part of our own body mind's way of protecting us, then
mm,
we can start saying thank you. Whereas
yeah,
if it's considered like, my body's against me, it's doing this, it just keeps letting me down, and I can't believe it, I've had this diagnosis, then I had that, then this happened, and so
yeah,
obviously we're going to start feeling very let down by the body. and
yeah,
then and then that's also where the embodiments, the kind of connection of body mind body, there's not really a separation.
yeah,
But in the beginning, it's helpful to separate from the experience, so that we can do
mm,
this kind of like looking after, and that's what's going to settle the autonomic nervous system. I mean, I do it
yeah,
with children, and I sometimes do it with adults, but usually with children. I'll sort of talk about puppy training, and I'll say, well, kind of, can we call your pain the name of a puppy? So I'll call it, I don't know, Jimbo. And so, okay, so now can we start? Can you imagine if Jimbo the puppy, all that Jimbo wants to do is to protect you, and he's
mm,
your he loves you so much, but he's very protective. So every time you have a friend coming to visit, Jimbo tries to bite your friends. Would you kick Jimbo every time he did that? And then the child invariably says, well, no, I'd never kick Jimbo. I would obviously train Jimbo. So I said, okay,
Yeah.
how are you going to train Jimbo? And so it's about feeling into this sense, and this could be for a child who actually has a part of them that's able to care for themselves. Because, you
Yeah.
kind of think, well, all very well being 33, but what if you really are 8 years old?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so feeling into how they might train a puppy, kind of that, I've got this, and you're
Yeah.
okay, Jimbo. And,
Yeah.
I'm just starting to train Jimbo, maybe ask your friend to open the door a little bit, not to just come barging in because that would be too much for Jimbo, but let's just do a little bit. So, looking at different ways of how do we feel into the sense of not just compassion for Jimbo, compassion for the pain or for the fatigue that's trying to do its job, but also how can I tap into the wise self, the true self, really, for me, the authentic self, because the false self is. Don't know if you've heard of Winnicott, D.W. Winnicott. He speaks about the false self and the true self.
Okay.
And so he was actually a pediatrician born in the late 1800s and was also a psychoanalyst. But he did all of his theory was that these selves develop, true self, false self. But that it doesn't just develop on its own. We don't just develop a false self all on its own. It's because of us being in relation to the other that these false selves develop. I mean, Gabor Mate speaks a lot about attachment trauma and understanding that link.
Yeah.
And then how that comes out. But yeah, I mean, I think for me that idea that these little parts aren't actually you.
Yeah.
they're just a little part of you that maybe has developed over time in order to protect you. And now the work lies in orientating to being the age that you are and that wise self, that true self that can, if you can see it, you don't have to be it kind of thing.
Yeah.
I recognize this perfectionist in me. I see the achiever in me. I see the fixer in me or the helper or the, whatever it might be, this pattern that really gets in the way of recovery. We can start recognizing it as it's coming up and then decide how we want to be in relation to it. It's probably always going to be a part of us, but it's just recognizing how we are in relation to that part.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I'm glad you, touched on the sense of self, because maybe we can talk a little bit about the spiritual aspect of the healing journey as well. But just to close off, maybe, or just to add a few things to what you were saying there, I think the key with all of that is realizing that the innocence of whatever is arising, like bringing back to that puppy analogy of that's why we don't, kick the puppy, because it's innocent, right? We realize that, but we don't realize that about ourselves. We don't realize that about these aspects of the personality, or the self, that it's innocent as well, right? So that reminder is so helpful. And then shifting into what you were saying about I like what you said about other and separation, because it's it sounds a little bit paradoxical sometimes, because part of the realization is that you are not that pattern, right? You are not that whatever it is, the protector, the achiever, the helper, all of these kind of patterns that we get stuck in. But at the same time, I think what is quite helpful, so stepping out of that and seeing, okay, that's just something arising in my experience. But at the same time, I think people can also get too much caught in the other aspect of, and specifically with chronic illness and symptoms and stuff, is this belief in something to get rid of, something that is apart from me and that is threatening me. So it's like exploring.
So hard. The acceptance. You're talking about acceptance.
Yeah, and
and
like allowance, but just
an
that
allowance.
that
Yeah.
belief
Oof,
that
that's a hard one.
there's something here that is not me, that needs to be gotten rid of before I will feel healthy and recovered. And
Exactly.
it's like a nuance, but when
Yeah.
that really kind of sinks in at some point, you realize like, oh wow, that's part of what was making things so challenging, is there were these aspects of myself that I was saying no, like you're not allowed to to
But
be
yeah,
there.
but in an unawake state, because and that's the difference is that it's not about trying to get rid of this part of you. It's actually about integrating the part.
Yeah.
And that's then for me where the healing takes place is that you're able to, through awareness, cultivation of awareness, we're able to recognize the part. And what's that lovely Viktor Frankl quote? Between stimulus and response, there is a pause, and in that pause lies our freedom to choose our response. And so it's that space that awareness gives to allow us to recognize what currently is my experience.
Yeah.
What is happening right now? And then almost being able to decide how one is in the moment, or how am I going to be in reaction or response to this experience. So noticing the perseverer inside of me as I decide this, I'm going to do this no matter what. But then at least you're awake to it, as opposed to 6 months earlier where you would have been in that mode, but you wouldn't have had a cooking clue that that's what was going on. You just would have done it.
True. Yeah.
And that for me is the difference. So it's not about not doing something or pushing away an experience or trying to be better or good. It's rather about being awake to whatever is unfolding in the moment.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think that's where like the awareness and spiritual side, again, often like the word spiritual puts people off. Like I remember when we first started, like the mind just jumps to certain conclusions. I remember when we first started working, you shared some stuff with me, and my immediate impression was like spirit, like what's this, like spirit? But it's helpful because it is, as one goes deeper on the path, you realize it's important. But it is just that awareness practices and understanding the spiritual journey. It is kind of the missing link often, because we can talk about all the other stuff, the polyvagal theories and all of the neuroscience and all of that, but if we don't understand, like you said, like becoming awake to what's actually happening, and then investigating the sense of separation, of boundaries, that can be such an important part of the journey. And maybe we can touch a little bit on bringing this all together, like the roots of this illness and authentic.
I actually have got a quote here that I'd like to just read to you, because I mentioned Winnicott, and I actually always have his quote here, because it so often with people, they're like, why are we talking about spiritual, as you say? So this quote really, for me, explains why it's relevant to someone who's got a physical problem or a physical illness or whatever it might be. And so Winnicott says, the alternative to being is reacting. And reacting disrupts being, and it annihilates. And for me, that's that's really, really essential, that the lack of presence annihilates the development of true self, or Gabor Mate speaks about authentic self. And if we loop that back just to one of our systems in our body that is there to recognize self, do you know which one it is out of all the systems available in the body in terms of the recognition of self?
No, which one?
Because it's the immune system.
Okay.
So the immune system is there to say, is this me or is this not me? So it's a foreign body, or it's a toxin, or it's a lung transplant, or it's a bug. So we all know that the immune system is there to say, is this Tracy or is this not Tracy? And if it's not Tracy, I've got to kick in. I've got to go and now respond. I've got to protect.
Yeah.
So in our essence, we have our true authentic essence, or authentic self, has been annihilated through not being.
Yeah.
You can imagine what that's going to, that's just the immune system. But, the the analogy is, I mean, not the analogy, but the explanation really then goes, wow, I can see maybe why I've developed an autoimmune disease, or I can understand why my body's in inflammation. It's fighting something that shouldn't be there. And so for me, it is not just part of the work, it is the work, is tapping into what kind of, you know, what does this mean? Authentic self and awakening, and you know, and that can feel so airy fairy, but in its essence, it's about being. And that's why that quote, I'll send it to you if you want to put it on the somewhere. I don't know where you put these things. But yeah, that, you know, for me, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
So not being annihilates.
Yeah.
And now I also know in the background what annihilation does to physiology. Okay, now that makes sense to me. Why this is so essential to the work. And yeah, I don't think you can have one without the other. I think I mentioned it to you in a WhatsApp. I choose when I'm going to say this to people, but somewhere in the beginning of the journey, I'll say, you do know you're not going to end up being the same person as what you are when you started the journey. Like there is going to be a change, you know, and that can be met with resistance because you know, but I want to get back to how my life was. I want to get back. And so no, the body or the fatigue or the pain is not, and I said this to you also, the fatigue and the pain is not the problem. It's the body's solution to a problem. It's our being trying to come up and talk and say, something needs to change here. And I never know what that is if I'm working with someone. And so the journey is one of togetherness where we can slowly find out, like, what can we cultivate here? What's been suppressed without knowing that it's been suppressed? And so can we give that part of you some space to come up?
Yeah.
And it's exciting. It's beautiful work, but it's hard.
It's hard, but it's a couple of, I like what you said about the immune system, the me, not me thing, because it's like that plays out on a much bigger level. Like we don't realize that the input that the mind has, you know, our relation in the world, when we get stuck in these experiences, like I'm reflecting on my own path to the illness, was just constantly the state of not me. Like in the relationship I was in, the social gatherings I was finding myself, there was just some part of myself saying, I'm not able to express here. I was too afraid to be myself because it wasn't the right, you know, people. It was like, again, it was kind of a defense mechanism from high school and stuff, where it was like there would have been a few times where I'd been myself and that had cost me quite dearly in the social matrix of high school. So you learn to completely repress yourself and you learn how to engage in the social hierarchy. But it was just this constant feeling of, I'm not myself. This is not me.
Sure.
And this
Giving you
fear.
goosebumps.
Yeah. And sometimes so one more aspect of that, there was this fear. I remember this thought of like, what if I never, because I was too afraid, like I was aware of this, but it felt too strong for me to do anything about it. Right. There was this like fear that, you know, what if this is the rest of my life? Like, what if I grow up and I just am never myself? And sometimes that physical thing is the only thing that's going to change us, because that was for me. Like there was nothing else. I was too afraid. I was too kind of stuck in my ways that I needed some like massive thing to come and like uproot my life and almost take the feeling of choice away from me for a while, to be like, I had to end the relationship. I had to step out of the studies I was in and everything that just felt like wrong. And the illness was a gift. It was my friend, but it's not easy work. Like you said, like it's a massive uprooting and disruption, can be an obliteration of identity as well, of who we thought we were. But that opens the doorway for the authentic self to come through. But there can be so much like resistance to that. There can be so much like repression. And I think that's actually, if I think back to some of the most helpful work that we ever did together, was the times when you kind of pointed me towards my authentic self. Like for me, as we mentioned, like the practical stuff, the activity scheduling, it didn't. For me, it had to go way deeper, and whenever we touched into that, that's when something would open up a little bit. And I remember
Mm.
one of our sessions where you gave me a list of values. I don't know if you remember that
Oh,
one,
yeah.
where you were like,
Mm,
here's
yeah.
20 values, and
Mm,
put it in order of what's most important to you. And like the top two was a sense of achievement, and but the second one was an understanding of life. And it was like I was opening up to like philosophy and stuff, but I'd never
uh-huh.
realized how important that was to me. And from that moment on, that's when there were still lots of ups and downs, but the journey went a lot deeper, because I was like, okay, I want to. It really opened up something in me. So that's
Yeah,
such an
that's
important
that
part.
tapping into that sense of, well, okay, what is this feeling of, as I said, when Eckhart talks about true self and false self. I mean,
Yeah.
you've just explained it in your own experience so beautifully, and actually given me quite a lot of goosebumps, because I remember that time so well, and hearing what that impact has had on you is
Mm,
really just fantastic to hear.
mm,
And it's something, like it's a values exercise. It seems like such a silly, I print out these little cards, cut them out, put them in order.
yeah.
But it's actually quite amazing to see what comes out of something like that. And you look
Yeah.
at that and you go, I'm nowhere near to that. And I always
Yeah.
talk about values as just being a little bit of a compass. It just helps guide you. And so when you're looking at your values and it's pointing there, and right now your life or your old life was pointing there, it
Yeah.
then starts also making sense as to perhaps why this has happened,
Yeah.
and why nature almost took the control away and said, okay, I'm taking over, right? I've been
Yeah.
giving you a few little signs here and there, but nothing seems to be shifting. So,
Yeah.
right, how about this? Bam!
Yeah, exactly. You can't ignore it anymore.
Can't ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. But I just wanted to quickly touch before I know we're going to draw to an end.
Yeah.
It's something that has come up a lot in the work that I'm doing, and who I'm seeing a lot of is people that have a neurodivergent profile. That's very hard living in a world or in a society that's very neurotypical,
Mm,
and everything is around this certain way of being and certain way of doing things. Schooling's structured in a
mm,
certain way. Social interaction has got these rules of how you should be. And then when you have a neurodivergent brain, trying to then live in that context, often will be associated with a false self developing, masking, or trying to keep up in a certain way, or trying to say
yeah.
the right thing. And what I see a lot of is something called autistic burnout, which presents in a very similar way to chronic fatigue syndrome. So I just
Mm,
wanted to add that in, because it's just it's another aspect of understanding oneself, actually,
yeah.
and embracing it. And
Yeah.
gosh, but it's hard. Again, it's
Yeah.
hard when you're the alternative to masking, or to, in your case in high school, trying to fit in. The alternative to that is being alone.
Yeah.
And that, maybe we can end on that, because what I was saying to you on the WhatsApp is, what I've realized is I can do all this work one-to-one with someone, but at the end of the day, it can be really lonely work. And so
Mm,
finding a sangha or a community of where you can start talking to not like-minded, but people that maybe can either share your experience, but also just that are interested in sort of similar things that you can chat about, whether it's
mm,
meditation or mindfulness. So I'm very excited that you've now just started offering this group, this community. So
yeah.
thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love it. So I'm very happy to do that. Yeah, yeah. So we'll finish off there. I guess, yeah, last points that I'll make is I totally agree, but I just reflecting back on my own experience with that. I remember that used to be a topic of conversation for us quite a bit, was um that feeling of, I don't have community, I don't have people that can relate to me. And going through the phase actually of allowing myself to be completely alone for a while, it was essential. But there was so much resistance before that, and again, it's part of the beliefs around being a human, the social conditioning and all of that, that I need to be social. I need to be out there. I need to have friends. I need to have community. And sure, like there's a time for that. But if it's just to anybody that's in that space, if it's just feeling so inaccessible, what happened for me is it was the same as the diet. It was the same as anything else. I was getting too worked up about this. I was too much trying to force it into action. And some of the deepest, shifts that happened in me was when I just allowed myself to be completely alone.
Oh, that's
And
really good to hear, actually.
yeah.
Again, like that's so nice for me to hear, because it's always something I'm like, well, I can't offer you that, as my
Yeah.
client. I can't be your social space. I think we
Yeah.
even had this conversation. I was like, we need to, kind
Yeah.
of taper off our sessions. And
Yeah.
I was people like, oh,
Yeah.
what about
But yeah, it's like, it's again, there's fear and
Mhm.
resistance to it. Like I
Yeah.
remember when you were first like, maybe, and it was important for me to go on my own eventually, and you did it in a great way. It was like, if you just said, hey, okay, look, we're done, I would have been like traumatized. But you were like, okay, we need to maybe spread it out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
eventually, yeah, I guess exploring like with people, I guess this is what I do now, is what it like, sure, when there's community available, embrace it. But what comes up that is terrifying when you're alone, like that's what it was for me. And it was this belief that I'm not allowed to feel loneliness. Like I think that's such a massive social conditioning thing, is it's like I'm not allowed to feel this fear of being alone, this whatever. And once that broke, and it had to break through being alone, and it was like, oh, there's nothing to
Yeah.
fear anymore. And actually I'm okay whether I'm
That's
alone or not.
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, because I'm actually, I hadn't actually thought about that, and it's so true. It's yet another thing that the
Yeah.
mind brings up to resist.
Yeah, exactly. It's trying to fix. Like I have to fix this with community. I have to
Yeah.
fix this with people.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm taking like just bringing it back. I'm like, yeah, I've been trying to fix this problem for people. So
Yeah.
there we are.
Yeah.
It's that. Thank you. That's going to sit with me. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm glad. All
Yeah,
right.
sure. Never
Yeah.
thought about it in that way, but it's so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
the same mind doing the same thing. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I think we'll leave it there. So
Yeah,
um
that was great. Thank you. I think we covered quite a lot, actually, and
yeah.
it was very.
Last
You
thing
never
I
know
want.
where these things are going to go.
You never know. That's the beauty of it. Last
Yeah.
thing, just for anybody that wants to, I don't know, maybe work with you, or
Oh, yes. So,
enjoys your
I
approach.
do. I've got a website. It's probably the best way to find me. So my name, Tracy Prowse, physio, all one word,
Yeah.
.co.za. And there is, if someone wants to work online with me, I have that available option. So
Okay.
if you're booking an appointment, you just click on
Cool.
online schedule. And yeah, I mean, otherwise, I'm based in Stellenbosch. So for those that are wanting more of a face-to-face session, then that's where I am. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Yeah, I'll put your link in the description on YouTube. You're available to work with people overseas? Because a lot of the people that watch my videos are
Yeah.
based.
I, so I I have done a lot, and I've only just recently figured out that, been told that as a health professional, I can't offer health. I can't, do it as a health professional, but I
Right.
could as a coach. So,
Okay.
yeah. So there's no kind of that, so someone couldn't claim back on their medical aid if they're sitting in America and they want to work with me. They couldn't
Yes.
um, claim it on medical aid, and I would have to do it as a coach,
Okay.
as opposed to a health professional. So because otherwise I'm stepping out of my regulations. So
Yes. But if somebody wants to work with you as a coach, then that would be
yes,
possible. Okay. And
yeah,
I would
but yeah.
say, yeah, for everybody who's sick of, the medical system, working with Tracy
But
as
they
a
might be fine with that.
yeah, exactly. Working with Tracy as a coach. And as I was saying, some of the deepest shifts that happened
Mm,
in me were not around the health, it was around the
yeah.
authenticity, the deeper work. So yeah, highly
Mm.
recommend.
Yeah, so you could just book a mindfulness session, or a mindfulness coaching session or something like that. So yeah, that's completely available to anyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Good. All right.